This is what the hospital complex MSCh-126, Medical Center 126, look like. One of the scariest places in the whole Chernobyl exclusion zone is not the dumps of abandoned equipment, the empty apartments of Pripyat, or even the Chernobyl NPP itself. This place is a small basement in the Pripyat Medical Center No. 126, located under one of the hospital buildings. Tourists are never taken to this cellar, and during the usual excursion trips to the city they don't even tell about it, so that no one would have an idea to get there. The basement itself is a narrow corridor about 60 to 70 meters long, along the walls of which are heating and water pipes, and there are several side rooms, all of them with an area of no more than 10 to 15 square meters. What is so creepy about this basement? Pripyat Medical Hospital No. 126 is notorious for being the place where firefighters who extinguished the 4th power unit on the night of April 26, 1986, as well as injured plant workers were taken for first aid. Almost all the firefighters from Lieutenant Kaibank's and Lieutenant Pravik's teams, who heroically extinguished the fire at the NPP that night, died within the next 2 weeks as they received radiation doses of several thousand rem, several times higher than the 500 rem dose, which is already lethal. It is impossible to even imagine what the body of a person who has received such a dose turns into. It literally glows with radiation, transmitting radiation to everything it touches. That night, when the firefighters were admitted to the hospital, they were first of all stripped, as their clothes were, in fact, no longer fabric, but solid radioactive waste, and then the clothes were thrown into the basement of the hospital building where the firefighters were lying. I think it was the most correct decision at that time. There were simply no places in the city where these clothes would not have posed a danger. The firefighters were supposed to change their clothes at the sanitary pass of the NPP, but it was closed that night and everything had to be done right in the hospital. All the firefighters' clothes are still lying in the hospital basement. Corridors of the hospital complex. Remnants of medicines, mattresses, and other medical equipment are lying on the floor. One of the most difficult for personal perception places in MSCh-126. The very hospital rooms that received the first victims on that fateful night of April 26, 1986. By 6 a.m., the accident occurred at 1:23 a.m. 108 people from among firefighters and station workers had already been hospitalized. Another 24 people were admitted to the hospital during April 26. The victims, who were in extremely serious condition, were being prepared for transportation to the 6th Clinical Hospital in Moscow. At about 6 a.m., Shashanok, a station worker, died. On the night of the accident, he was on duty in the room located under the feeder unit of the Unit 4 reactor. The injured firefighters who were extinguishing the fire at Unit 4 were also taken to the rooms. A total of 28 people arrived at the plant in the first minutes after the accident. The duty guards of VHR-2, Paramilitary Fire Brigade guarding the Chernobyl NPP, and SVHR-6, Composite Military Fire Brigade fire protection of the city of Pripyat. Chiefs of duty guards who arrived at the plant in the first minutes after the accident. The Chief of Guard of SVHR-6, Lieutenant of Internal Service Kybnak, and the Chief of Guard of VHR-2, Lieutenant Pravik, directly participated in the organization of fire extinguishing at Unit 4. Thanks to skillful actions and personal courage of the officers, the firefighters managed to partially localize the fire on the roof of the unit and prevent the fire from spreading to the neighboring 3rd power unit. They received a high dose of radiation incompatible with life, about 600 X-rays. They died on May 11, 1986 in the 6th Clinical Hospital in Moscow. Lieutenants V. Pravik and Kaibank were awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union, posthumously, for their courage, heroism, and selfless actions during the liquidation of the accident at the Chernobyl NPP. They extinguished a fire in the reactor compartment of the 4th power unit. They died of a high radiation dose 2 weeks later in Moscow. Probably the heaviest and creepiest items that can be found in the city. Remains of the uniforms of the firefighters who put out the fire on the night of April 26. Here we came to the creepiest object in Pripyat, the basement of the hospital MSCh-126. Why is this place creepy? In the hospital MSCh-126, a few hours after the accident, starting at 4 a.m., brought victims from the station. Among them were both CHNPP personnel and firefighters who liquidated the fire on the roof of Unit 4. All the things, including shoes, outer clothes of the victims and underwear on which they were lying, were thrown into the basement, as they smelled a lot of poof. The basement itself is quite small. It's a long corridor with heat pipes wrapped in thermal insulation running under the ceiling. Many of the owners of these things are long gone. Several dozen people who participated in the response to the fire at Unit 4 died an agonizing death within 2 weeks in Moscow Hospital 6. A lot of time has passed, but these things are still contaminated with radiation. The background is simply prohibitive. It should be noted that in MSCh-126 itself the background is quite normal. The hospital is among the objects that are included in the program of the official tourist excursion. It is strictly forbidden to visit the basement of the hospital. And not only because of the high radiation background, there are a lot of various chemicals and other things that are not suitable for health. In the past you could find officers' caps, helmets and many different helmets here, but over time these items started to disappear somewhere. What is the maximum background you can intend in the basement? According to stalkers that visited the basement, the floor in some areas of the basement shines up to 1 to 2 Röntgen per hour. It is about 100 to 200,000 times higher than normal, and these levels are really dangerous to health. In addition to high levels, the source of radiation contamination of the basement itself is very bad. It is finely dispersed and highly radioactive dust and fuel particles from the 4th reactor. Everything in this basement is literally saturated with it. Dust and particles fly in the air. Neither a gas mask nor a pedal respirator will protect from it 100%. Firefighters' boot measurement, over 30 milliröntgens. To make it clearer, more than 1,000 times the natural background radiation. The owners of these things received a dose of 500 to 600 Röntgens. The atmosphere in the basement itself is oppressive, but the feeling of a certain connection with that epoch and specifically with the night of April 26, 1986 does not leave. There are some metal cylinders lying on the floor, and on the left you can see the entrance to one of the side rooms. Inside one of the rooms there are metal hospital cabinets, shelves, and other equipment. Inside several others, the very clothes of firefighters and station personnel are piled up. Already at the entrance to the room, the dosimeter shows a background of several tens of thousands of microröntgens per hour. Somewhere on the upper floors of the hospital is the helmet of one of the firefighters, shining with a background of 80,000 microröntgens per hour. It's a creepy and eerie place. Not all experienced visitors of the exclusion zone, who have traveled here more than 10 times, dare to get into the basement of MSCh-126. Very few people want to return there at all. And there are almost no visitors among my acquaintances. Personally, I would go down into the basement of death once again. Probably, the interest to history and banal curiosity wins. But personally I do not advise you to go down there. There are much more interesting and safe things in the world. We go back up from the basement and see the rest of the helmet from the basement of MSCh-126, which inexplicably appeared in the hospital hall. Like anything from the basement, the helmet is quite phoned in. Soviet symbols have also been preserved in the hospital. Who and when was the first to find those very phonating things of firemen who were near the destroyed block of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant on the night of April 26, 1986? The fact that these things were put there in the first days after the accident is clear to everyone, but why and who made this cellar so popular? Recently we heard a story from one of the Chernobyl zone workers who lived in Pripyat before the accident at the plant. The basement of the medical center with radioactive things of firefighters was found back in the 90s, or even earlier. But there is one big catch: the people who found these things, including helmets, had no idea that these clothes taken off the bodies of Chernobyl firefighters emit just 1,000 milliröntgens, and specifically could reach 800 Röntgens. That is, the people who first found this room in the basement of the Pripyat hospital simply had no idea of the serious danger that awaited them when they decided to dig here. Then the logical question arises: what kind of daredevils were they? The answer is simple: most likely they were local looters. In the 90s, the city of Pripyat in the Chernobyl zone was just filled with people who wandered there in search of something valuable. Times were so difficult back then, to put it mildly. I can't tell you whether they were legal or illegal looters. The story of the firemen who found things in the hospital. The story of those who found these things in the 90s is as follows. One day a group of men, who were looking for some valuable things in the abandoned hospital in Pripyat, decided to go down into its cellars. in which were hidden some apparatus and metal objects that had some value. Naturally, these people did not have dosimeters then, so they would not be able to measure the radiation level of this or that thing. And at that time no one really cared about it. As eyewitnesses tell us, the looters got into this room and started searching things for anything interesting. They were touching clothes with their hands, going through helmets and other things that were in this radioactive place. Once they found what they needed, they just left. Eyewitnesses say that within weeks, these looters had severe burns on their hands, as well as on the parts of their bodies they touched with their hands after searching for valuables in the hospital. What happened next to these people, we do not know. As people who are still working in the exclusion zone today tell us, many looters who sawed metal in the 90s and even in the 2000 years in Pripyat did not live to this day. That's why when you go to the Chernobyl zone, you should have a dosimeter with you, because it may turn out that you will be the discoverer of some place that may contain highly radioactive substances. In fact, the Chernobyl zone is all radioactive, but there are places that are dangerous not only to health, but also to life. It's best not to go into the basement. I strongly recommend not to go into these basements, because not only the room carries danger, where the things of the firemen lie, but the very air of the whole corridor carries the danger of flying particles together with dust. The fact is that outside there is soil and open space in which radionuclides are dispersed. And in the basement there is only a concrete floor and walls. So it is very easy and simple to breathe in dangerous radioactive particles here. But this does not prevent both official tourists and stalkers from visiting this place. This is such a story about the discoverers of the very basement of the abandoned hospital of Pripyat. If you like such stories about the Chernobyl zone and you appreciated this material, be sure to put a like, and who is not subscribed to my channel, subscribe.